In a small cottage tucked away in the rolling hills of the English countryside, there lived a family of three. The house was modest, with creaky wooden floors and windows that let in streams of golden sunlight each morning. But among all the simple furnishings in their cozy home, there was one piece that held a special place in everyone's heart. It was an old leather chair, worn and weathered from years of use. The brown leather had faded to a soft tan color, and there was a small tear on the left armrest where the stuffing peeked through. The cushions had molded perfectly to fit one particular person, and the wooden frame creaked gently whenever someone sat down. To most people, it would have looked like an ordinary old chair that had seen better days. But to 12-year-old Emma and her family, it was the most precious thing they owned. Every single evening, like clockwork, Emma would hear the familiar sound of heavy boots on the front porch. Her father, William, was coming home from another long day at the local factory. His work was hard and tiring, leaving his hands rough and calloused, his clothes dusty, and his face weary. But Emma always knew that no matter how tired he was, Dad would have a smile waiting just for her. The moment William stepped through the front door, he would kick off his muddy work boots and hang his coat on the hook by the entrance. Then, with a deep sigh that seemed to carry away all the stress of his day, he would walk straight to his special chair as soon as he settled into the familiar embrace of the worn leather. His entire face would transform, the lines of tiredness would smooth away, and his eyes would sparkle with warmth and contentment. Emma would watch from wherever she was in the house, waiting for the magic words she heard every evening without fail. "Come here, little one," William would call, patting his knee with a gentle smile. Without hesitation, Emma would drop whatever she was doing and run across the room. She would climb up onto his lap, nestling into the safety of his strong arms, while the old chair creaked and groaned under their combined weight. This simple ritual had become the most important part of Emma's day. Sitting in that chair with her father, she felt like she was in the safest place in the entire world. The chair seemed to wrap them both in warmth and love, creating a little bubble where nothing bad could touch them. It was in this very spot that William would open his favorite book of fairy tales. His deep, gentle voice would bring to life stories of brave knights who rescued people in danger, kind princesses who helped the poor, and magical adventures in faraway lands. Emma would listen with wide eyes, imagining herself as the hero of each tale. Sometimes she would fall asleep right there in his arms, and he would carry her to bed without waking her. When Emma struggled with her schoolwork, the chair became their classroom. William would patiently help her with her math problems, never getting frustrated when she didn't understand something right away. He would draw pictures and use simple examples until everything made sense. There's no such thing as being too slow to learn, he would tell her kindly. Everyone learns at their own pace, and that's perfectly fine. The chair was also where father and daughter shared the events of their days. William would tell Emma funny stories about his co-workers at the factory, about the silly mistakes people made, and about the small kindnesses he witnessed. Emma would share her own adventures from school, her friendships, her worries, and her dreams. No topic was too big or too small for their evening conversations. During these precious moments together, William would often stroke Emma's hair and share his wisdom about life. "Emma, my dear," he would say in his warm, loving voice, "I want you to remember something very important. No matter what happens in life, no matter how difficult things might seem, love is the strongest force in the world. It can heal any hurt and solve any problem. As long as you have love in your heart, you will never truly be alone." From the kitchen doorway, Emma's mother, Grace, would often pause in her evening tasks to watch them together. Her heart would fill with joy seeing her husband and daughter in their special moment. "You two and that old chair," she would say with a laugh full of affection. "I swear the chair holds all our best memories," and Grace was absolutely right. Over 15 years, that simple piece of furniture had witnessed countless bedtime stories, homework sessions, heart-to-heart conversations, and quiet moments of pure love between a devoted father and his adoring daughter. The chair had absorbed every laugh, every whispered secret, every gentle word of encouragement, and every expression of love. The old chair had become much more than a piece of furniture. It was the heart of their home, the place where their family's love grew stronger each day. It was where problems were solved with patience and understanding, where fears were chased away with hugs and reassuring words, and where the most important lessons of life were learned not from books, but from the wisdom of a loving father. In that small cottage in the English countryside, surrounded by simple belongings and modest comforts, a family had discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in money or possessions. It was measured in moments of love, shared in the embrace of an old leather chair that held their hearts together. As the cold winter months slowly gave way to the gentle warmth of spring, Emma began to notice subtle changes in her father William. At first, the changes were so small that she thought she might be imagining them, but as the days passed, they became harder to ignore. William, who had always been an early riser, now moved more slowly when he got out of bed each morning. Emma would watch from the top of the stairs as he made his way to the kitchen, his steps careful and measured instead of the confident stride she remembered. His morning routine, which used to take him 20 minutes, now stretched to nearly an hour. When William came home from work each evening, something else had changed too. His laugh, which had always been deep and hearty, now sounded quieter and more strained. The funny stories he told about his day at the factory became shorter, and sometimes he would stop mid-sentence, looking tired and distant. Most noticeably, William was spending much more time in his beloved leather chair. What had once been their special evening ritual was now happening throughout the day. Emma would come downstairs for breakfast and find him sitting there, staring out the window with a cup of tea growing cold in his hands. When she returned from school, he would be in the same spot, sometimes dozing with his head tilted back against the worn headrest. Emma tried to convince herself that her father was simply working too hard at the factory. Maybe his boss was giving him extra shifts, or maybe the work was becoming more difficult. She told herself that once he got some rest, everything would return to normal. The alternative was too frightening for a 12-year-old girl to consider. But then came a Tuesday afternoon in early March that changed everything forever. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, struggling with her arithmetic homework, when she heard the front door open much earlier than usual. Her father never came home before 5 o'clock, and the old grandfather clock in the hallway had just chimed 3 times. When William walked into the living room, Emma's heart skipped a beat. His face was pale, almost grey, and his hands were trembling as he made his way to his chair. He sat down heavily, as if his legs could no longer support his weight. The chair creaked more than usual, and for the first time, it sounded like a groan of concern rather than a welcoming embrace. William sat in silence for several long minutes, his breathing shallow and uneven. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, he called out to his family. "Emma, Grace," he said softly, "we need to talk." The words sent a chill down Emma's spine. Her father had never sounded so serious, so scared. Grace appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron, her face immediately filled with worry when she saw her husband's condition. Grace settled herself on the sofa across from William's chair, while Emma curled up on the carpet beside his feet, just as she had done countless times before. But this time felt different. The air in the room seemed thick and heavy, filled with unspoken fears and terrible possibilities. William reached down and took Emma's small hand in his own rough, warm palm. His grip was gentle but urgent, as if he was trying to give her strength. For what was coming next, Emma could feel his hand shaking slightly, and she squeezed back, hoping to give him some of her courage. "I went to see Dr. Thompson today," William began, his voice quiet and careful. "I haven't been feeling well lately, and we needed to find out why." Emma's heart began to beat so fast she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. Dr. Thompson was the kindest man in their village, but Emma had always associated visits to his office with bad news and scary possibilities. William paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "The doctor says I'm very sick, sweetheart. I have something called cancer, and it's going to be a difficult time for all of us." The word cancer meant nothing to Emma. She had heard adults whisper it sometimes, but she had never bothered to ask what it meant. Now, seeing the fear in her mother's eyes and hearing the sadness in her father's voice, she understood that it was something terrible. Something that could take away the person she loved most in the world. From that day forward, the old leather chair took on an even more important role in their family's life. It became William's refuge, his safe harbor during the storm of his illness. Small bottles of medicine appeared on the table beside the chair, their labels filled with words Emma couldn't pronounce. Sometimes William felt too weak to stand up, but he never complained or felt sorry for himself. When Emma came home from school each afternoon, she would find her father in his chair, and his face would light up despite his illness. "Come sit with me, Emma," he would say, and she would climb up beside him just as she always had. They would watch their favorite television programs together, and William would tell her stories about his own childhood, about the mischief he had gotten into and the lessons he had learned. Even though sickness had entered their home, William's love for his daughter remained as strong as ever. His hugs were still warm and comforting, his smile still genuine and bright. The chair seemed to understand its new responsibility, holding them both through the frightening times and wrapping them in the same comfort and love it had always provided. During their quiet moments together, William would stroke Emma's hair and whisper the same words he had always told her. "Remember what I told you about love being the strongest thing," he would say softly. "That's still true, no matter what happens to us." The morning William passed away was grey and quiet, with heavy clouds hanging low over the English countryside. Emma had just turned 13 2 weeks earlier, but on this day she felt much older and much more alone than any child should ever feel. The house that had once been filled with laughter and warm conversations now felt as cold and empty as a tomb. Of all the empty spaces in their small cottage, nothing felt more hollow than William's beloved leather chair. It sat in the living room exactly where it had always been, but now it seemed to take up too much space and not enough space all at the same time. The worn brown leather that had once held the warmth of a loving father now felt cold and lifeless, like the shell of something that had once been beautiful. In the days following the funeral, Emma and her mother Grace found themselves unable to even look in the direction of the chair. It was too painful, too final, too much of a reminder of what they had lost forever. The sight of it made Emma's chest feel tight and her eyes fill with tears that seemed to have no end. Grace, who had always been the strong one in the family, now seemed fragile and broken. She would walk through the living room with her eyes fixed firmly on the floor, hurrying past the chair as if it might reach out and grab her with memories she wasn't ready to face. One morning, about a week after the funeral, she couldn't stand it anymore. Emma watched from the kitchen doorway as her mother took a white bedsheet from the linen closet. With shaking hands, Grace draped the sheet carefully over the entire chair, covering it completely from view. The white fabric fell in gentle folds, transforming the familiar piece of furniture into something that looked like a ghost of its former self. "I can't," Grace whispered to herself, her voice barely audible across the quiet room. "I just can't look at it right now." But even covered, they both knew the chair was still there. It was like trying to hide the sun behind a cloud. Everyone knew it was still shining, even when they couldn't see it. The white sheet seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the living room windows, making it impossible to ignore or forget. Emma found herself experiencing a confusing mix of emotions whenever she looked at the covered chair. Part of her felt angry at it for still being there when her father was gone forever. How did it continue to exist when the person who had given it meaning was no longer alive? It seemed unfair and cruel that a piece of furniture could outlast the man who had loved it so much. Another part of her felt guilty for wanting to get rid of the chair entirely. Sometimes, when the pain of missing her father was too much to bear, she would imagine pushing the chair out the front door and never seeing it again. But then she would remember all the happy times she had shared there with William, and she would feel terrible for wanting to throw away something that had meant so much to him. Most of all, Emma felt heartbroken when she realized that the strong arms that had held her every evening would never hold her again. The lap where she had felt completely safe and loved was gone forever. The gentle voice that had read her bedtime stories and helped her with her homework had been silenced permanently. Their house felt like it had lost its heart and soul. In the evenings, when William should have been settling into his chair with a contented sigh, Grace would sit alone on the sofa. She would try to read her books or watch television programs. But Emma could see that she wasn't really paying attention to anything. Her eyes would drift toward the covered chair, and then she would quickly look away again. Emma had taken to doing her homework at the kitchen table instead of in the living room where she and her father had always worked together. The living room felt too big and too quiet without William's presence. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick more loudly than before, as if it was trying to fill the silence that had settled over their home like a heavy blanket. The worst moments came late at night when Emma would wake up from dreams where her father was still alive. In those first few seconds of consciousness, she would forget that he was gone. She would slip out of bed and tiptoe down the stairs, expecting to find him in his chair reading his newspaper by the light of the small table lamp. Instead, she would see only the white sheet draped over the empty chair, and the reality of her loss would crash over her like a cold wave. She would stand there in her nightgown, staring at the covered chair and feeling the sadness wash through her all over again. Sometimes she would cry quietly, and sometimes she would just stand there feeling numb and hollow inside. One evening, as Emma and Grace sat together on the sofa trying to watch a television program neither of them cared about, Emma finally asked the question that had been burning in her heart for weeks. "Why did he have to leave us?" she whispered, her voice small and broken in the quiet room. Grace pulled her daughter close, and Emma could see tears shining in her mother's eyes. "I don't know, love," Grace replied honestly. "But I know he didn't want to. Your father loved you as more than anything in the world, and if he could have stayed with us forever, he would have." As they sat together in their grief, the covered chair seemed to watch over them like a silent guardian. It stood as a painful reminder of everything they had lost. But somewhere deep in Emma's young heart, a small voice began to whisper that it might also be a reminder of everything they still carried. Teach them. 6 months had passed since William's death, and the seasons had changed from the cold grip of winter to the gentle warmth of summer. The white sheet that had covered his chair for all those months had become a familiar sight in the living room, like a piece of furniture itself. But as the days grew longer and brighter, Grace began to feel that it was time to face the painful task she had been avoiding on a quiet Saturday morning in July. Grace sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. She had been thinking about William's belongings for weeks now, knowing that she couldn't keep avoiding them forever. Emma, now 13 and a half, was sitting across from her, reading a book but occasionally glancing up at her mother with concern. "Emma," Grace said softly, setting down her teacup with shaking hands. "I think it's time we went through your father's things. We can't keep hiding from them forever." Emma felt her stomach clench with nervousness, but she nodded bravely. She had been wondering when this day would come, and part of her was relieved that they would finally face it together. They had been tiptoeing round their grief for too long, and maybe it was time to be brave together. Mother and daughter walked slowly into the living room. The covered chair sat in its usual spot, looking like a sleeping giant under the white sheet. Grace reached out with trembling fingers and grasped the edge of the fabric. Both she and Emma held their breath as she slowly lifted the sheet away. There it was, exactly as William had left it on his last day. The brown leather was still worn and soft, molded perfectly to the shape of his body after so many years of use. The small tear on the left armrest was still there, with tiny bits of stuffing peeking through just as they always had, even more. Surprisingly, the faint scent of William's aftershave still clung to the leather, as if he had just gotten up from the chair moments before. Emma gasped softly when she saw it again. For a moment, she almost expected to see her father sitting there, smiling at her with that warm, loving expression she missed so much. The chair looked so familiar and yet so strange after being hidden for so long. Grace folded the white sheet carefully and set it aside. Then she began the difficult task of cleaning round the chair, dusting the small table beside it where William's medicine bottles had once sat. Emma helped by organizing the magazines and newspapers that had been left scattered on the floor from his last days. Daughter's Grace ran her hand along the armrests to clean them. She felt something unusual. There was a crinkling sound coming from the side pocket of the chair, the same pocket where William used to keep his reading glasses and sometimes a few coins. Grace had forgotten that the chair even had pockets, as they were hidden in the seams of the leather. Dot with curious fingers, Grace reached into the pocket and pulled out a white envelope. Both she and Emma stared at it in surprise. Written on the front in William's careful, familiar handwriting was Emma's name. Below that, in smaller letters, were the words, "To be opened on your 18th birthday, or when you need me most." Emma's heart began to race as she stared at the envelope. Her father's handwriting looked exactly the same as it always had, neat and precise from years of writing reports at the factory. Seeing those familiar letters made her feel as if he was right there in the room with them. "Should I open it now?" Emma asked her mother, her voice barely above a whisper. Grace looked at her daughter's face and saw the longing and hope there. "I think you need him most right now," she said gently. "I think he would want you to read it." With hands that shook like leaves in the wind, Emma carefully opened the envelope. Inside were 2 sheets of paper covered in her father's handwriting. As she unfolded them, she could almost hear his gentle voice speaking the words as her eyes moved across the page. "My dearest Emma," the letter began, and immediately tears began to blur her vision. "If you are reading this, then I am no longer there to tell you these things in person. But please know that my love for you will never end. Not even in death." Emma had to stop reading for a moment to wipe her eyes. Grace moved closer and put her arm round her daughter's shoulders as Emma continued reading. The letter was filled with William's memories of their time together in the chair. He wrote about the bedtime stories they had shared, the homework sessions, where she had struggled with difficult problems, and the quiet conversations where they had talked about everything and nothing. He reminded her of his favorite moments, like the time she had fallen asleep in his arms while he was reading to her, or the evening she had told him about her first day at a new school. William's words were full of love and pride for the young woman Emma was becoming. He told her that she was kind and brave and full of love. Just like her mother, he reminded her that when life became difficult, she should remember that she carried his love with her always, like a light that could never be put out. The most beautiful part of the letter was when William wrote about the future. He told Emma that he hoped someday, when she had children of her own, she would sit in this same old chair and tell them about their grandfather who had loved them before they were even born. Love is the strongest thing in the world, Emma, the letter concluded. It doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes form and lives on in the people we leave behind. Be happy, my darling girl. Live a life filled with love and kindness, and remember that whenever you sit in this chair, I am there with you. As Emma finished reading, tears streamed down her face like a gentle rain. But for the first time since her father had died, they were not only tears of sadness and loss, they were also tears of gratitude and joy for having had such a loving father, and for discovering that his love was still with her in ways she had never imagined. 10 years had passed like pages turning in a well-loved book since Emma first discovered her father's letter hidden in the old leather chair. The 13-year-old girl who had once cried over those precious words had grown into a confident young woman of 23. Her life had changed in wonderful ways that would have made William's heart swell with pride and joy. Emma now lived in a small but cozy flat in London with her husband James, a kind teacher she had met at university. Their home was filled with modern furniture and bright colors, but in the corner of their living room sat one piece that looked completely out of place among all the new things. The old brown leather chair, now even more worn and faded than before, occupied a place of honor near the window where the morning sunlight could warm its cracked surface. The most precious addition to Emma's life was her 6-month-old daughter, Rose, a beautiful baby with bright eyes and a smile that reminded everyone of her grandfather. Rose had brought joy and laughter back into Emma's world in ways she had never expected. But more importantly, she had given Emma a chance to understand the deep, endless love that William had felt for her all those years ago. On nights when Rose would wake up crying, Emma would lift her from the crib and carry her to William's old chair. She would settle into the familiar embrace of the worn leather, feeling the same comfort and safety she had known as a child. With Rose cradled in her arms, Emma would rock back and forth gently, singing the same lullabies that her father had once sung to her. The chair seemed to remember those old songs, creaking softly in rhythm with the melodies that filled the quiet apartment. As Rose grew older and began to understand the world around her, she became fascinated by the old chair. While other children her age were drawn to bright plastic toys, Rose seemed to prefer playing near the faded leather seat. She would stack her wooden blocks on the armrest or curl up with her picture books in the space where her mother's feet rested. One afternoon, when Rose was almost 3 years old, she climbed up onto Emma's lap and asked the question Emma had been waiting for. "Mama, tell me about Grandpa," Rose said in her sweet, clear voice. Emma smiled and pulled her daughter closer, settling them both comfortably in the old chair. This was the moment she had dreamed about since reading her father's letter all those years ago. She began to tell Rose stories about William, describing his gentle nature, his love for his family, and the wisdom he had shared during their evenings together. "He was the kindest man in the world," Emma told her daughter. "He taught me that love is stronger than anything else that might try to hurt us, and he would have loved you so very much." even though he never got to meet you. Rose listened with wide, curious eyes as Emma described the bedtime stories William used to tell, the way he helped with homework, and the important lessons he had shared about life and love. Through these stories, Rose began to know her grandfather as a real person, not just a name or a photograph on the wall, during difficult times in her adult life. Emma found herself returning to the old chair for comfort and guidance when she was worried about money, or when she and James had disagreements, or when she felt overwhelmed by the challenges of being a new mother. She would sit in William's chair and close her eyes. In those quiet moments, she could almost feel her father's strong arms round her and hear his gentle voice telling her that everything would be all right. The chair had become something magical, serving as a bridge between the past and the future. It connected Emma to all the love and wisdom her father had given her, and it would connect Rose to the grandfather whose spirit lived on through the stories and values that were passed down to her. Grace, now a proud grandmother, visited Emma's family often. She would always smile when she saw little Rose playing near the old chair, her heart full of bittersweet joy. "Your father would be so proud," she would tell Emma. "He always believed that love would continue long after he was gone, and looking at you and Rose, I can see he was right." Last week, James had asked Emma a question that made her think deeply about the old chair's place in their modern home. Why do we keep such an old, worn piece of furniture in our lovely flat? He wondered aloud. Wouldn't we have more space if we got rid of it? Emma had smiled at her husband's practical question and pulled him down to sit beside her on the wide armrest of the chair. "This chair holds our family's love," she explained patiently. "It's where my father taught me everything important about life. And it's where I'll teach Rose those same precious lessons." As Emma spoke, she realized how completely her father had been right about love being the strongest force in the world. William's love hadn't ended when his life did. Instead, it continued to live and grow in the old leather chair, in the memories that Emma treasured, in the stories she told her daughter, and in the kindness she showed to others every day. Whenever friends or neighbors asked Emma about the secret to happiness and contentment, she would think of her father's words and his beloved old chair. Love truly was eternal, she had learned. It might change its form over the years, but it never disappeared completely. It passed from one generation to the next, growing stronger and more beautiful with each telling of the story. And that miracle of continuing love, Emma believed with all her heart, was the most beautiful thing in the entire world. The end.